Come see us on tour. We're going to be in Bakersfield, San Jose, California, Buffalo, New York, Toledo, Montreal, Toronto, Ottawa, Glasgow, Manchester, Belfast, Dublin, Liverpool, Birmingham, and London. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for tickets. Earlier, you talked about they're now trying to block out the sun and the climate change myth. I'm not a climate scientist. But I do have a pretty good bullshit detector, and I can tell that Al Gore and people like Al Gore, John Kerry, and Barack Obama and Bill Gates have been lying. Either they're the biggest hypocrites the world have ever seen, or they're just straight out lying, and they're using climate change just like they use hate speech laws as a way to control people, because these people all fly private jets all over the world. And one flight on a private jet emits more carbon than my car does in my lifetime. So if they really cared about carbon emissions, they would stop doing that. They're not. Barack Obama goes to Africa. He tells everybody, you can't have air conditioners or your own car or the planet's going to overheat. He tells the people in Africa that. And then he gets on a private jet and flies back to his new house that he bought, that's beachfront property.
They've all got beachfront. They've all, Al Gore and the rest of them, they've all got beachfront property. And I suppose you could say perhaps they're so wealthy, so obscenely wealthy in some instances that, that if their beachfront mansion gets submerged by rising sea levels, maybe that's just, the change in their dressing gown pockets and it doesn't really matter to them. But I very much doubt it. I think the reality is that they know, like the rest of us do, that yes, we have climate change. The climate's changeable. The climate's variable like it always has been. But this nonsense about a climate crisis and about a world at boiling point and a world about to burst into flames is errant nonsense. And it was demonstrated, like I said earlier, this, putting solar panels everywhere. And then the next thing is let's turn down the power of the sun. There's no joined up thinking about it at all. And it is gross hypocrisy. If any of these people meant it, if any of these people, they speak so passionately about the danger that we're all in, they would be living the life themselves as an example. That's how you lead. It's like St. Francis of Assisi, was born into wealth. He was a rich man's son, and he lived the life of a rich man's son until he got religion, until he got Christianity, and then he gave away everything, and he lived a life of poverty. And he insisted that all of his followers live a life of poverty thereafter. Now, that's how you do it. That's the way that you get that message across. You live the life first. And if by living that life you inspire other people, then they live likewise. But the fact that these people want to preach this nonsense from the bridge of their private jets, or from their goodness only knows what, nuclear-powered submarines that they want to cut about the world in, is just rank hypocrisy. I've reached a point in my life where I have faith in next to no one. I look out at everyone who's to whom I have to listen on the coming out of the official mouthpieces, and I find almost all of them completely intolerable.
It's amazing they never, it's a known fact. I don't know if it's well known. But the number one emitter of carbon in the world is the U.S. military. We have 900 military bases around the world. 900. Nobody comes close. I think China has 2 outside their own country. Russia might have 3. We have 900 military bases around the world. And people like Barack Obama, Al Gore, John Kerry, Bill Gates, they never say, hey, maybe we should shut down those 900 military bases. Hey, maybe we shouldn't blow up the Nord Stream pipeline. They never say any of that. Hey, maybe we should stop the war in Ukraine. They never say any of that. And which I just know that they're full of shit. And same thing with Greta Thunberg. Is as soon as she protests outside a military installation that's been going up, they just built 3 more in the Philippines in the last couple of years. The United States did. Then I'll believe her. But until then, I think she's just a tool of the establishment. She's welcomed at Davos, which is that's a red flag for me. And I again, I'm not a climate scientist, but I know when people are bullshitting me, and those people are bullshitting me. And exactly as you said, if those people were walking the walk, then maybe I would be more inclined to believe their talk. but I don't. And none of their predictions have come true. Al Gore was saying 20 years ago that the Arctic was going to be free of ice in the summer. That, of course, that didn't happen. They talked about, the coral reefs are all dying. There's more coral reef now than ever. And by the way, more carbon that gets put into the air has created a greening of the planet.
The point that, there are so many fronts that you can open up in the war against the climate crisis hoax. You know, the planet temperatures may have been warming a little bit, but it coincides the time at which accurate records began to be kept of temperature coincided with us coming out of a little ice age.
Yes.
You know, the planet had been cooling for thousands of years. So effectively, they started taking measurements of temperature when we were at the bottom of a very deep well, at which point there was only really one way to go up. And when it comes to the amount of CO2 that's been so demonized as some sort of toxic gas, when in fact it's actually plant food, it's fundamental to life on Earth. It's right down now at 400 and some parts per million. And if it drops below about 300 parts per million, there's no green life on Earth. So there's no plants for the animals, so there's nothing for any of us to eat. If the CO2 doesn't increase, then everything dies. Life on Earth could not have been sustained if the level of CO2 in the atmosphere had continued to fall. You know, there have been times in the past when the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere was in the thousands of parts per million. It's now down at a critical point, and yet, and so temperatures had to go up because we had just come out of a little ice age, and we need rising CO2 because that causes the greening of the planet. You know, once upon a time the Sahara was green. You know, it hasn't always been and isn't necessarily supposed to be a desert. Everything about the climate hoax is bogus, not least the fact that the people who've been so loudly campaigning about it. I mean, Al Gore, I believe, when he ran for US president, was worth a couple of $1 million. And at the last count, he was worth something like 300 million. It's like everybody in Congress, you know, they crawl in skinny like worms into a coffin and then they crawl out fat. You know, and you know, it's so blatant. It's so blatant that it's a money-making scheme. And climate is just another carriage on the gravy train.
And so what do you make, what do you say to the people? Because I've had people say this to me. Well, Jimmy, 99.9% of all climate scientists and all the climate studies agree that climate change is a problem and it's caused by man's burning of carbon. What do you say to those people?
Yeah, but that 90% of scientists line is a fix. That 90% of scientists line was accomplished by having a team of researchers, not climate scientists, but you know, mildly qualified people, look at the abstracts on thousands of academic papers, which is to say they didn't even read the papers themselves. They read the abstract, the summary on the front cover. And based on that, they put all of these thousands of papers in piles, whereby the authors either had a strong decision that human beings were the main cause of whatever was happening with the climate, those that were ambivalent about that position, those that said no, human beings were not to blame, and so on and so on. And it came out quite a mild figure. But what they did was they threw into the bin all of those academic papers that had been on the fence, that didn't make a decision either way. All of that was thrown out. All of the papers that said not so sure, couldn't really come down hard and fast either way. And having dispensed with all of that uncertainty, they arrived conveniently at this figure of whereby they were able to say 90% of climate scientists agree that we are to blame for everything that's going wrong on planet Earth. It's bogus.
Well, you know, I just lived through COVID, and I was told that you know, all the doctors and scientists agree about COVID, and of course they didn't. They suppressed the ones that were the heretics, or the people who were the critics and the skeptics, and they never talked about the Great Barrington Declaration. They never, and then anybody who did have a alternative viewpoint on COVID, whether it be the origin of the virus, they were slandered as racist, whether it be the lockdowns, whether it be the vaccines, or masks, or herd immunity, or natural immunity. Those people were all pushed to the margins, and they were all slandered and diminished and discredited by the establishment media, which of course is bought by the big pharma, the people selling the drugs and creating the crisis. And then I find out that even medical journals, like the Lancet, and are funded by big pharma, so they're corrupted. So the whole thing is corrupt, and so that's what. Nothing has changed me more than Russiagate and COVID. That I don't believe anything the establishment says now, including their line on climate change, because I just think it's probably the same thing. That there's people whoever funds the study is the person who gets to determine how that study turns out. And if it doesn't turn out the way they want, they just squash the study. Have you had the similar experience?
Yeah, I mean, I was turned inside out by my experience of what happened from the outbreak of the so-called pandemic onwards, because up until that point, in my early 50s, I was apolitical. I hadn't really been paying attention to what was going on around me, because I was too wrapped up in my own stuff that I had going on, like most people. But I basically trusted that a government in the UK, whether it be of the left or the right or of the centre, broadly speaking, had mine and my family's well-being at heart. That it wanted the best for me, regardless. And I thought that the institutions were all there, broadly speaking, wanting to make the world a better place, wanting to take care of us. I call it naive if you want, but that was the mindset that I had when the COVID debacle began to unfold. And I thought, oh goodness me, maybe we should lock down. For the first couple of weeks, I thought it was probably the right thing to do, because I believed what I was being told about this desperately dangerous disease that was coming at us out of China via Italy. And I thought they're going to be wheelbarrowing bodies up and down the street shortly. This is the advent of the bubonic plague. I believed all of that. But then it began to become apparent that we were being lied to, because everything that they said didn't happen. The lethality wasn't there. People. I still to this day don't know anybody who died of COVID, but I've lost count of the number of people that I'm aware of around me in this, typical Scottish town of Stirling, who've died of heart attacks young, who died in their beds, aged in their 40s and in their 50s. All of these neurological conditions, all of this, people face planting on the field of play, young people, myocarditis, and all of the rest of it. I've seen all of that. Still don't know a single person that died of COVID. And then we were all of that nonsense about the magic arrows on the floors of supermarkets that you had to follow, and the necessity to wear face masks, that you needed to be, you were all right if you were sitting down in a pub, but if you stood up, you had to put a mask on. All of it. Then the vaccines came out, and they were safe and they were effective, and you needed to take them to stop granny getting sick. And then it turned out that they hadn't tested them to see if the vaccines would prevent transmission, and they hadn't tested them for safety, and they weren't effective. The lies just started to build up one after the other. And those fringe, niche, controversial things that all the people you're talking about had been saying all along, one by one, were proven to be true. The time of there has never been a time when experts were so discredited, which was what made it so fascinating to listen to Douglas Murray's side of that three-way with Joe Rogan and Dave Smith, where he was insisting, no, it's that we must listen to experts. As you rightly said, it was that idea, if you're going to buy a new car, for God's sake, don't do your own research. Who should I listen to? The salesman, he's the one to trust. The time of the experts is over. The time of the time of my blindly trusting what I was being told by figures in authority is gone, never to return. That my world, my understanding of the world, my perception of reality has been turned inside out by the last 4 or 5 years.
Come see us on tour. We're going to be in Bakersfield, San Jose, California, Buffalo, New York, Toledo, Montreal, Toronto, Ottawa, Glasgow, Manchester, Belfast, Dublin, Liverpool, Birmingham, and London. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for tickets.